Hello guys, hi everyone watching. My name is Georgie Ryan Casling. I'm the content manager for Witekio. We're just going to wait about 30 seconds, 40 seconds to let other people join as it's just been 3 o'clock. And and then we will start our talk for today. So if you bear with us for 30, 40 seconds and then we'll begin. Okay, lovely. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining. As I said, I am Georgie Ryan Casling and I am the content manager for Witekio. So if you are watching on Livestream, hello, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on anywhere else that we are streaming, hi, thank you so much for joining us. You can ask your questions. There's a chat button in the corner, or obviously on any of the platforms, it will be below. Please ask your questions because we will be answering them live at the end. And if we don't get round to them, then our experts will, get hold of them and we can send you an email. So I'm going to do the introductions and at the end I'll answer the questions. And apart from that, you won't hear from me, don't worry. It'll be all our experts. So let's get going. So today's session obviously is from Witekio in partnership with Pentest, and it is all about IoT Ecosystem Security. So how to identify and secure threats on your connected device. The agenda is obviously intros, then Pentest actually will take hold first, and then Witekio, and then we'll talk a little bit about how Witekio and Pentest can help you. You can see what they are going to cover in this corner. So an overview of risk analysis, common vulnerabilities, IoT Ecosystem 101, and what's a threat model. So a lot to cover today and a lot to learn, which is exactly what we want you to do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. And the first one we're going to talk to is Julian. Julian, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at Witekio?
Of course. Thank you, Georgina. So I'm Julien Bernet. I'm security manager at Witekio. I joined Witekio roughly a bit more than 1.5 years ago. With the objective, my main mission is to set up proper development method for security. So basically, the starting point for all of this is basically what we are talking today is how to set up a sound risk analysis and threat modeling. So that's all for myself. Thanks.
Hi, and my name is Paul Ritchie. I'm a managing consultant at Pentest Limited, part of Shearwater Group. I've been a penetration tester since around 2005. And yeah, I'm a managing consultant, meaning I also, for my sins, run a team of about 10 people at this moment as well. And I think that's us. We're moving into the slides. So first off, I'm going to start with a bit about risk analysis and then talk a little bit about common vulnerabilities and some sort of information about how you would exploit those kind of things as well towards the back end. And knowing about risk analysis can fundamentally change your way of thinking. If you're thinking with a risk analysis mindset, you can spot vulnerabilities sooner, and sooner in development means cheaper as well for you to fix, which is excellent. And I can sort of see from the slides that I've seen of Julian's later that he's echoing this kind of talk as well. Because you want to try as far as possible to reduce the risks before you bring a device to market, because it's just a lot cheaper. And so first off, to get into the mindset of risk analysis thinking, you're going to have to know what you have, because without knowing where your land starts and ends, you can't build the right fence to protect it, basically. So find your assets. You've got to know what devices, networks, servers, or people make up your product and the ecosystem that it sits in. And to do this, you got to think critically about your product and the ecosystem that it lives in. So what physical and software components exist and how do they communicate? Where and how does the data flow through it? What kind of data is it? Is it sensitive medical information, which would risk embarrassment, injury, ill health if it's leaked? Is it just uniquely identifying individuals, so it has a data protection kind of caveat to it if it's leaked? So you got to know what it is as well before you can secure it. And where and how does that sort of flow through your ecosystem? Does it stay local to the device itself? Or does it sync to a mobile phone locally over Bluetooth? Then it would be on the device and on the handset as well. Does it get onto the handset through the cloud via an API or a dashboard or something like that? Think about it. Where does it go? How does it get there? Is it encrypted while it's doing it? And is it protected at rest? And is it also outside of the scope of this, but is it in a territory where it's safe and legal to do so, because there are laws to worry about for the sort of geolocation of this stuff. So these are the fundamental questions, and you're going to want to document your assets and note down what exists and where it exists. So this is the start of formulating your what we would call a risk register. Very fancy word for a spreadsheet. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet, and that's got to start with what is the asset? Is it a physical device? Is it the controller that they speak to? Is it a dashboard in the cloud? Are there people involved in various stages? All those kind of things, and then you start to fill out your risk register as we go through the process here. So I'm going to talk about traditional risk analysis for a moment. So this is where your mind might be changed a little bit if you haven't seen this before. Traditional risk analysis is three sort of pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Ensuring confidentiality means that an attacker cannot access data that they should not be able to see. So if you breach that would be, like I said before, kind of fined under GDPR legislation or things like that. Integrity is about ensuring that the attacker cannot change data that they're not allowed to, right? So if you can change the data, then you can impact things negatively. But also, I think of integrity as the integrity of the device itself. If you think that an attacker can execute a command on the device, then that device can't be trusted because they can change fundamentally how the device operates. So it's not just about the data, that is about whether you can trust the device itself. And availability, that's about ensuring that an attacker cannot prevent a legitimate user from accessing it. So obviously those sort of three things have served us quite well, going back quite a while. The sort of model of protecting CIA can be about securing, say, an emperor giving instructions to a general in the field. You want to make sure that it's confidential, because then the enemy doesn't know the battle plans. You want to make sure that it hasn't been changed in transit, so that the battle plans aren't altered maliciously by the enemy. And availability as well. You want to make sure that your generals actually have the information. So this has served us quite well for quite a long time. And IoT specifically has introduced a new sort of pillar in this sort of risk analysis system. CIAS for safety, or P for preservation of life. This is coming up because ensuring that compromising a device does not risk the physical safety or human beings, and I guess animals, right? So with the more and more connected devices, we have to sort of start to think about this stuff, because before, losing a bit of personal information, it's a bad day, it's probably a fine, but it's very unlikely to risk the safety of a human being or like an animal, for example. Maybe the threat model about the ancient emperor is an exception to that. But yeah, like generally speaking, if you could leak something like the location of individuals who have, say, abusive ex-partners, then that's kind of an edge case where the CIA model leaking the information would have had an impact. But we're talking much more concrete risks to impact. So if an attacker can remotely compromise, say, a smoke alarm to disable it, and then they've got remote access to your smart kettle or smart device, and they're able to somehow get that device into a cycle which might encourage a fire, then you can sort of see how the connected ecosystem around your homes could seriously impact, pose a risk to the safety and preservation of life. Let's not mention things like pacemakers and stuff like that. These are always talked about when we're talking about IoT security. So by adding in safety or preservation of life to the CIA model, we get CIAS or CIAP. And that risk analysis thinking is critical going forward, sort of from this point. So once you've thought about the model, you know about those pillars, what you're gonna have to determine what is impacted in the model. So is it one or all four or three of those pillars? Because you can have an attack that's fully just about turning off access to legitimate users. That's crashing it. That's a denial of service. And there's different risks to businesses with different pillars that are impacted. So you need to know which one or which multiple is impacted, and then to the extent to which the impact occurs. Because obviously, if we find something that is a complete loss of confidentiality for all information about one user, that's pretty bad for the one user. If it's all information held about all users, then it's a different level of ball game, isn't it? That's a much wider thing. And also in the connected space, if we're really taking that safety and protection of life seriously, well, if you can affect every pacemaker in the world, then that's a big problem as well. So that'd probably be worse than just losing the data. So worst case, completely one or more of these pillars for every user. But then once you have this kind of information, we're taking our risk model a bit further. We're going, right, well, there could be an impact to integrity, availability, or whatever. We've got to figure out how each of those threats, how likely those threats are to actually occur. And then also estimate the cost of implementing a solution to those problems, because we simply don't have the budgets to fix absolutely everything. If it's more or less theoretical, you just have to keep it in the risk model as, well, we've accepted it, we're running with this risk, but we have to know who was there. And we're not going to fix things that are prohibitively expensive, because we have to target budget at the highest impact on the most likely threats. So now you know a bit about it. We need to talk a bit more about that risk register. It's got to be holding everything, all your assets. It's got to be knowing the actual likely threats to them, and the unlikely threats have to be tracked as well. And you also want to keep that as a living, breathing document somewhere where the management structure of your organization has a permanent record of it, where it's kept up to date and where it's periodically reviewed. Because if you don't ever look at it again, what was the point in that exercise? And so, yeah, periodically the management team should look at it. So every quarter or whatever, open up the document. Is there anything new that's come in from maybe our engineers, from our users, or from security researchers or companies like ourselves, Pentest, who've been engaged to look into it? Is there anything new that needs to be added to that? Add it in. Is there perhaps a sort of case for fixing something that's maybe in the backlog that we didn't fix in the last quarter? That kind of stuff. These documents need to be living and breathing. And like I say, you target the budget at the highest impact, most likely threats first. So moving through the risk analysis mindset part, we'll talk about a couple of common vulnerabilities in IoT. There are sort of frameworks out there that track the common vulnerabilities, and they all pretty much agree on these as being the sort of foundational ones. Vulnerabilities common, default or easily guessable credentials. So we got some screenshots to support these ones on the right there. So if your device or your product has a user manual that has a static username and password that is fixed for every device, then you're opening yourself up to exploitation. This isn't theory, this is practice. There have been many cases where devices have shipped with static usernames and passwords. They've then the password's been made known to the internet, and then those devices are remotely compromised en masse and then used in various malicious things like distributed denial of service attacks. That means your devices are then involved in big news stories because you're bringing down parts of the internet. So it's actually the reason that there's the two screenshots for this one in particular of the four is it's kind of the easiest one to fix once you know about it. But also it shows evolution over time. The top screenshot on the right is from an old Netgear router where each one shipped with this sticker on the side of it where the username was admin and the password was password, right? We know that's weak. That's a weak combination that's been in every attacker's sort of word list for passwords and credentials for years. So that's exceptionally weak. But that's how routers used to go. That's how connected devices used to be. They had these things written on them. Then you sort of see the evolution with the bright box down on the right there, where it's now, it's still a sticker on the side of it, but the username and password are unique per device. There's a slight caveat that we're in the evolution. It's always an arms race between the attackers and the defenders. And obviously, if the algorithm that's generating that password is proved to be have a weak source of randomness, or it generates passwords that are semi-predictable in some fashion, which has been the case through the evolution of this, you'll be able to guess the password anyway, and then you're back at the risk of it being admin password effectively. So we've talked quite a bit about that one. The rest of them we'll kind of skip through at a pace. Non-existing updates. If you offer no way to update the software on a device, it can quickly become obsolete because of a vulnerability that's found in it. That's either a costly product recall or abandoning the device completely if you can't actually update them. So make sure that we're engineering those in. And I'm pretty sure, I think Julian's slides are mentioning that one as well. Doing updates securely is important because an attacker can and will attempt to abuse the feature to try and run custom code. If they can intercept the code that's being put on the device and in some way change it, so we're affecting the integrity in the CIA model, then you'll be able to run custom code on the device and you have another problem. So you can flip a coin and decide whether it's worse to not have an update functionality or to have one that's vulnerable. Like, equally, they're bad in my mind. Outdated software. So obviously, you want to cut down on development time. You're going to use a third-party library or a framework, and that's great, should be encouraged, but you have to make sure that you're on top of the version numbers and that you're following those projects that you've relied on so that you can keep your devices up to date. That goes in tandem with the firmware update mechanism, effectively, making sure that you're being able to push the updates to them, or at least telling users that they have to. And then the final one is insecure communication protocols. So this could be HTTP if it's a sort of beefy device like a router here, or it could be over the air, Bluetooth from a phone, etc. However it's done, we want to make sure that the protocol is robust and using what the best cryptography the device is capable of effectively. Right. So we'll jump on to the next one. What can be attacked? So if you think about a sort of standard architecture, there'll be physical devices. They'll probably communicate over a network some way and most likely have a dashboard. So what can be attacked with a physical device? You're going to try and dump that firmware. You're going to try and access admin services over serial interfaces, that kind of thing. They're going to crack open the case because the attacker has the device for a protracted period of time, and they're going to try and just do malicious things with the hardware. Network communications, again, we mentioned it on the last slide. They're going to try and dump firmware over HTTP, HTTPS. If that's an insecure update feature, they can try and exploit protocols, including all those ones listed there, and radio. With network communications, you can try replay attacks. So if there's no protection in a really simple system, if you send the same radio signal between devices and the attacker is just close enough to capture it, they can straight up replay it. And there's been cases of smart garage doors that do this kind of thing where you can then just replay it and open it. They're going to try jamming. They can just spam the frequency. So if there's some sort of gain for them to just straight up stop the device working, if they're able to break the communication that way, they'll try that. Supporting infrastructure. This is falling back to sort of like standard penetration testing skills. So like this is a skill set that pretty much all attackers in the world have. Whereas the network communications and physical layer can require additional skills and additional hardware to sort of exploit those things. So that's kind of where your risk lies of what can be attacked. Exploitation requirements. So again, if we think about the same structure, physical device, network communications, supporting structures, if you're going to attack the physical device, if it requires physically touching it, then an attacker needs physical access. And that means targeting a client deployment means gaining physical access to it. If this is on a customer's site, you're going to be contending with their sort of physical security. And I was once doing a sort of workshop for IoT security, and the customer, one of the customers that day said, well, we're not in charge of the customer security, so we don't want any quote or anything to do with the physical attack sort of side of it. And I mean, they're totally right, because they don't secure the customer's buildings. But, ideally, you want your engineers to be thinking about this You're not responsible for it, but you can certainly make it harder for devices to be physically pulled apart and have sort of reverse engineering measures and stuff. Network communications, the attacker needs to control a device on the network. So if we're talking something that's speaking over IP addresses and things like that, then that means compromising a device on the same network. That could be like remote phishing. Let's just assume someone's clicked an email, their device is now compromised, and the attacker would then be able to stage their attacks from that device to get to the device. That's better for attacker, because we like putting our hoods up and being invisible. Because I'm quite risk averse. I quite like not being in jail. It's lovely. I mean, it's not very sunny in Scotland here right now, but like it's still better than being in jail. So if you're talking about network-based attacks, you're getting it slightly more comfortable for the attacker. I don't want to James Bond it into someone's factory deep down, because I'm not supposed to be there to take things down off the wall and try and fiddle with it. That's too much exposure for me. So network communications makes it slightly more comfortable. Radio frequencies, if we're talking about attacking things that are communicating via Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or just radio signals, obviously we can do that from near a site. That's, again, more comfortable. That's why it's easier. And of course, the difference here, individual physical attacks would be impact a single compromised device one at a time. They've got to physically do something to it. And then network communication, you can do one or more at the same time, as long as you're proximate enough to actually reach them. Then the supporting infrastructure. So this is kind of an all eggs in the basket kind of scenario. Supporting infrastructure is generally available over the internet. It's usually a web application or an API. And like I said earlier, attackers can learn the skills to compromise these things from YouTube channels and things like that. There's no barrier to learning the knowledge for this stuff. It requires no physical devices or setup costs, really, just their time. So it's also the most comfortable one, because they can attack from the comfort of their own home. It's over the internet. It's pretty much anonymous. And of course, if you compromise the supporting infrastructure, you'll likely get access to all of the data that's been processed by that ecosystem of that device, which means it's obviously the highest value target. So that's why when you're building out your threat model and stuff, you'll most likely start with that end of it. Make sure that the internet facing part is easiest to be, to have the knowledge that it's secured, and then work your way back to the physical device, etc. So that's where you kind of would start with your budget, because it's the easiest place to do so, and it's also potentially the highest impact if you have it. And if we jump on to the next slide, it's all about firmware. So an attacker wants the firmware as their priority, because it helps them learn about the device. It lets them look for those known vulnerabilities and the outdated libraries, etc. It's just quicker. You might find plain text credentials in there that you can abuse once you've got access to it. You can just look for source code for vulnerabilities, etc. And there's a sort of another event that Pentest are involved in right now called Own to Own, or Pwn to Own. And our director of research, Mr. Sam Thomas, who I'm legally not allowed to be within 20 feet of because I love him too much. Sam Thomas is working on that right now. There'll be an event tonight where he's effectively targeting 2 devices, and he always tells us when he's doing the sort of IoT stuff for us that he's like, it starts with firmware. You get the source code, and then you go from there effectively, and that's fundamentally different from how you have to target a web application or the supporting infrastructure for the dashboard, because even though there's no setup costs, you can learn all the skills on YouTube, etc. Like I said on the last slide, unless it's an open source website, you don't actually have access to the source code of that site. So you've got to do it all what we call black box. You know what's going in and what's coming out, but what's inside the box, you have no idea. Right. So when we're testing those things, we're simulating a real world threat of an attacker without access to the source code and that kind of stuff. But when we're talking about the firmware that's powering a device, then because it's almost always kind of retrievable and accessible over enough of a time scale, because the attacker would not be limited by the bounds of a pen test, which is a couple of days or whatever, they have a protected period of time. That's why we say plan on the assumption that the attacker knows everything about the device. And when you engage with a provider like Pentest Limited, you're giving us everything because we're trying to deliver a time-limited engagement and make as many recommendations as possible for the highest quality deliverable and the best possible security for your ecosystem and assets available. So, we will be your trusted partner. So you're going to have to trust us on this one and go for it, because the threat actors have as long as it takes to get to their goals, basically. So a little bit more about that firmware. So the first thing that they want to do, wait, have we lost a slide there? Yeah, sorry, we killed a slide there. So I'm going to pass off on to Julian now.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So you described pretty much most of what I wanted to talk about. So I would try to gain a different angle, but actually I do agree that having a proper risk analysis is a cornerstone of starting a good security development. Now, when I arrived in Witekio, one of the first questions I had to provide an answer is how to come up. How do we do to start from a risk analysis and set up a proper security development routine that would allow our product to resist versus the kind of attacks that you are describing. So first of all, I just wanted to backtrack a bit on what you said and outline what are the challenges here. First of all, Witekio is a software development company. So basically, everything we do is for our customers, and we had to come up with some concrete, down-to-earth way of achieving this risk analysis with our clients. This is really one of the first pillars we had to keep, and we need to keep all across our missions, is that we need to maintain ownership of our customers over their solutions. So we need to figure out a way of supporting them in doing the risk analysis, estimating, being able to measure it against the state of the art of the attacks that hackers and white hats such as yourself can achieve, and come up with the proper solution. And they need to have visibility, because once the development is over, then our customer need to be able to operate properly their own security on their product and the security updates. So ownership is one of them. Cost efficiency, of course, is one of them. IoT developments may be done under several constraints of time to market and speed of development and cost. So we need to come up with a cost-efficient solution. There is no way we can, I could propose something like a full-fledged EBOS risk analysis or this kind of thing. We need something very pragmatic. We need to target achievable and applicable security objective we can inject in our security development flow. And of course, this analysis needs to be useful. It means that it must not stay just a security document. It must supply requirements for the development, for the validation, and it must supply inputs for penetration testing lab, such as a pen test. So first of all, starting from the beginning, in my opinion, one of the specificities of IoT is the fact that you've got a very heterogeneous ecosystem. And usually your standard IoT system comes up with several devices on the left, which may or may not be connected via some low power radio protocol to a gateway. Some of them are directly connected to the internet, and the gateway achieves the communication between these devices and the backend cloud infrastructure over the internet. Then on the cloud side, we have backend processes, of course, hidden behind the endpoints that are used to connect to the IoT devices. We've got database servers, and we've got front-end applications. So all of these components may be the target of an attack, and as a developer, we need to figure out some way of protecting all of this. And that's not an easy task. For instance, I tried to outline some of the most common attack paths available for an attacker for such an ecosystem. You can attack the device itself, so you can try to dump the firmware, for instance, to gain access, gain knowledge about the source code and be able to use the device as an attack path for the whole system. You can inject a malicious firmware, execute your own code. You can try to do this using some other software attacks if you are not able to inject your own firmware. You can use debug interfaces, etc., etc. On all the communication channels, you can, of course, try to gain access to some information, either by passive eavesdropping or achieving a full-fledged man-in-the-middle attack. By the way, man-in-the-middle may allow you to inject also some firmware, some malicious firmware, either in the device or the gateway, or may allow you to impersonate the devices to the cloud infrastructure, providing for better attack potential. On the other side of the picture, you can obviously attack the front end, and it will be a target of choice since it's really exposed. And as you mentioned, Paul, the cloud infrastructure is where you've got your high-level assets. So that's really something you do not want to let in a dark corner, so to say. So how do we come up with something that manages to protect everything? That's one of the challenges, and that's not the only one. I mean, you've got this huge attack surface. Also, as we mentioned, usually IoT devices are easy to come by, as opposed to for instance, server software that's usually very hard to come by. Many IoT devices, you can just buy them and then take your screwdriver and JTAG probe and try to learn something about the device. The whole system uses a very wide range of technologies, languages, protocols, starting from the bottom of the stack and embedded devices and low-level developments, up to the cloud infrastructure orchestrations, database schemes, etc. So there are many ways of doing things wrong and many ways to provide ways for an attacker to exploit some unforecast behavior. All these components, as is usual with many modern software, make an intensive use of open source components, which has a bright side because open source components are notorious for being monitored and being challenged on a routine basis by the security community. But also the dark side is that you are committed to take care about all the new vulnerabilities that are found by the community and to provide a way to update your software so as to inject the security patches. Otherwise, a black hat has basically at least the same level of information as you. So you need to figure out a way of dealing with this. Some of the devices, of course, have strong technical constraints in terms of CPU power consumption that may prevent you to implement strong cryptography, robust cryptography, for instance, or other kinds of security mechanisms, because you need your device to operate in some specific conditions. So we often see this kind of constraints. The fact that many users are using IoT and that there may be a complex infrastructure of tenants and stakeholders on an IoT system means that the identity and access management policies may be very intricate, and you may have many ways of abusing an incomplete or faulty policy. And last but not least, we do not have, as of today, a nice, clean, uniform regulation or standard for IoT. We have several initiatives. There is ETSI 303, 645, for instance. We've got the Cyber Resilience Act. We've got the initiatives from the NIST. But there is a lack of visibility and clarity in these regulations and standards, and we need to deal with this. We need to use our own path in some sense, waiting for actual proper regulation to come by. So how do we do in this setting? So it's pretty challenging, and we need to come back to the fundamentals. So the fundamentals are risk analysis and threat modeling. This is why our process is kind of standard. We start with vulnerability analysis. The main driver here is come up with some simple and understandable way to do this, because we need to communicate with our customers so that they completely own the analysis and they understand every bit of it. And we need to have it tightly integrated into our secure development flow. It means that the end of this vulnerability analysis needs to be a set of concrete, down-to-earth security requirements that are injectable as is in our development flow, and that provide an efficient answer to the security problem that the product is facing. Then we develop the product. And of course, we need to take care about these security requirements. We need to take care about robustness also, because it's not because you have some I don't know, some kind of authentication mechanism against your infrastructure that its implementation is does not have any software flow, for instance. So beyond only checking that the security requirements are properly implemented, we need to ensure that they are robust and that there is no easy software path that would allow an attacker to compromise them. Since one of the main principles I believe in is that we need an independent look at what we did, I strongly advise for any development, be it made by Witekio or by any other company, to be honest, to leverage on penetration testing to get this independent overview, and especially to get the proper skill set that comes with skilled pen testers. To be honest, it's really not the same skill set between a developer and a pen tester. And we do not claim to be pen tester at Witekio. We need someone to come up and challenge the solutions we proposed. And the last phase after penetration testing is obviously operational use. As I mentioned, you need to secure your future. You need to be aware about new public vulnerabilities, and you need to come up with some way to provide secure updates. And it's not an easy one, but it needs to be planned carefully from the very first stages of the inception of the product. So, speaking about the first step, in terms of risk analysis, all our risk analysis are really driven by threat modeling. So they do match with confidentiality, integrity, availability, and safety properties, but the actual grid that we use to ensure coverage is not CIAMS. Basically, how do we do this? We do workshops with the customer, since we need to provide ownership of the security solution. Well, we follow standard steps. We try to understand precisely what are the assets to be protected, what is the attack surface of the product. This is where lots of discussion may happen, especially in the early stages of the design of a product. We try to list the primary threats that target the assets of the product. That's the most interesting and fruitful discussion usually with our customer, because I mean, you need to imagine figure out anything that can happen to your product, but also you need to choose your fight. So you need to come up with some kind of priority, stating this threat is very impacting. It must have priority one. If this happens, I'm screwed, basically. And you need to come up with some kind of sort of ordering of your threats, so that you can properly inject the right amount of effort in each threat. And that's really where lies our added value of Witekio. The idea is that for each threat, we try to explore all the possible attack paths. So we try to figure out everything that could come up to your mind, Paul, or any one of your colleagues, and that would allow you to implement this threat. What we use to do this is actually a pretty standard formalism. It's pretty old. I guess it was proposed in the 1980s by Bruce Schneier, and it's called attack trees. Basically, an attack tree is really a simple graphical representation of what would an attacker try to do with a product. And basically, this tool can be used both by attackers and by developers. The idea is that at the first level of the tree, you list all your primary threats. Then for each threat, you try to figure out what are the various options you have to implement this threat. This is where you will find OR junctions, meaning if I want to realize this threat, I can either do this or do this or do this. Some of the attack path, then you will need several components in order to come up with the proper recipe for your threats. So you can have end junction that appear on the attack tree, meaning that if I want to realize this threat, I need to have both this and this and this and this in this specific order. It's really as simple as this. The fact is that usually this attack tree tends to grow pretty quickly and become very massive, so we need some ways to factor out some things, but that's really the basis of what we are using for the threat modeling. Then when you've unfolded the attack tree up to a certain point, you can start to work on your solution. And this is where we will try to consider each leaf on the attack tree and come up with a proper mitigation or security objective that will, if not ensure, at least make the attacker's life difficult in trying to implement this attack path. Since it's a bit abstract, I tried to come up with a very small example of what an actual attack tree would look like. So here, let's consider, for instance, the threat gaining access to confidential information. So I'm an attacker, I want to gain access to some confidential information on this small IoT device that connects in Bluetooth to its gateway. So what could I do? I could try to eavesdrop on the Bluetooth channel. I could also try to implement a man-in-the-middle attack, meaning that I would impersonate the device to the gateway and the other way around impersonate the gateway to the device, simply translating the data from left to right and right to left, but gaining knowledge in the meantime. The first one, I could try to implement it. I will need two ingredients. First, I would need to be able to position a sniffing device in close proximity to the target. And the other ingredient, I need to be able to run a Bluetooth sniffing tool. And with both these ingredients, it's okay. I've got my attack. It's not that complicated. So now, if we switch side as a developer, what can I do to prevent this kind of attack? I can forbid physical access to the device surrounding. That's kind of an environmental objective and external to the product. But maybe more important, I could try to come up with proper encryption over the Bluetooth channel so that the attacker would need to have the encryption keys to be able to gain access to this information. So this is precisely what I'm doing. For man in the middle, basically that's a bit like the same setting, except that in here, if I want to forbid man in the middle, I only have to use a proper pairing process between my device and my gateway so that the attacker would not be able to intercept the Bluetooth communication during the pairing and set up its man in the middle. So that's really what we are doing to build up our risk analysis. We're unfolding this tree and in the second step, come up with solutions. So that's this slide sums up basically what I've said on the previous one. So we will come up with security objectives, both internal for the product or the IoT system, and some of them will be external and will target security policies and assumptions that were made on the operational environment of the product. Then we'll refine the security objectives in operational security requirements for our development. So for instance, this analysis will drive us in implementing a proper secure boot for the devices because we need to ascertain the integrity of the software that will be executed. Secure communication, device authentication are also some security mechanism we may provide. We'll also take care about provisions regarding the supply chain requirements. For instance, it's tempting to do firmware encryption. so as to avoid the threat Paul was mentioning and try to hide our source code, I mean, our customer source code from the eyes of an external attacker. But firmware encryption comes with a very high price in terms of provisioning and proper secure provisioning of the keys, both in the device and the cloud infrastructure. So these aspects we need to take care about. Secrets provisioning, software signing are aspects of the supply chain that we need to keep into our scope when we are developing the proper security solution. And of course, every aspect linked to the life cycle of the devices, deployment, decommissioning of the devices is maybe of the utmost importance depending on the product. I will be short on this one, but basically, during the development, once we've built this threat modeling, this risk analysis based on the threat modeling, what we will do is check that every security requirement stated above is properly implemented on the product. Beyond this, we need also to provide some way to deal with public vulnerabilities. It means that our developments are we are committed to provide some automatic way to have a precise software bill of material that lists all the open source software components and their versions, so that the proper CV tracking can be achieved both during the development and during the operational use of the product. And of course, last but not least, we need to figure out, I mean, we need to code properly, and we need to have some level of guarantee that there is no exploitable software flow in our code. This is where we usually leverage on robust static analysis tools and dedicated security testing campaigns. To sum this up, and I will end here, the global flow looks like this. When we finish development, we come up with the product, and that's really a very good idea to send this product to a company like Pentest for actual penetration testing, and so that they can challenge the whole security solution. The next step beyond the penetration testing, of course, is proper interaction between the lab and the developer. And we need to come up with some corrections and some hardening, assuming that Pentest succeeded in some of them attacks. So this is where close interaction with the penetration testing lab is of the utmost importance as well. Basically, over was what I wanted to present. So I can hand it over to you, Paul. And thanks for listening to my part.
Thank you, Paul. Got it now. Paul is muted, so he's going to sort out his mic a second. Julian, I loved your alarm going off. I'm sure that was your timer to know that you have to go.
To be honest, the alarm was about my son leaving school.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, just to remind everyone, we are live. And we are people.
I need to be scared if he's not at home right now, but he is, so that's okay.
So are
Paul,
they back
you
in?
good now? Yes, you're there. You go. Amazing.
It seems I can only speak or hear myself. I'm changing devices between speaking and hearing. Right, so sorry about that. So how do we solve it? A lot of what Julian said there was just a mirror and a different way of doing exactly the same thing. So you can sort of see alignment there between the two practices. So generally speaking, how do we solve it? And it was touched on. Consumer security standards are available. And the one example that we've shown here is the UK government code of practice out of the UK, but others are available. You got to pick the ones that are relevant. Fundamentally, they're pretty similar. Like nobody's making this in a vacuum. They're all kind of overlapping, but I guess there's a reason for controlling your own standard. So the code of practice here, this is the one from the UK government, and it literally echoes exactly points 1, 2, 3. Are pretty much in line with the most common vulnerabilities that I was talking about. So the code of practice is great. Obviously, the actual solution is security throughout the development and the life cycle of the device. What these code of practices do, though, is beyond just getting it pen tested and assessed for security and improving the posture of yourself and the devices. What these codes of practices can do is offer you something that you can wave at people when they're trying to buy your devices. So when your customers come towards you, you say, we sign up to this code of practice. Here's the evidence. We followed all the steps. And in some situations, you can get the stamp on the side of the box, which is really what a lot of these code of practices are driving towards. So not just like having things that say this has been pat tested. This is saying this has been security tested, and it's a thing that you can then have as an attribute on the box. But the real answer, how do we fix it? A little bit of essentially following a good practice and process throughout development and the life cycle of the project, and keeping in line. Pick one and stick aligned to a code of practice. And I think that's us for the slides, isn't it?
Yeah, just one remark, if you're okay, Paul, on the code of practice. Something so it's interesting because basically you've got roughly the same structure that you can find in the European standard I was referring to at C33645, and by the way with some recommendation from the French government. So as you mentioned, no one is reinventing the wheel here. You've got very large pieces of oh, sorry, I like this one, but I mean, the intersection between both the standards and regulation is usually pretty large. The thing I wanted to highlight from a developer perspective, what's interesting is that you've got some easy wins here. And obviously, these are the ones you want to go for very quickly. No default password is the most obvious one. Secure communication as well. Also, I mean, communication stacks nowadays are pretty robust. There are still some ways of doing things improperly, especially with TLS, for instance. But that's the ones you need to fix and that have the highest cost to benefit ratio. But some of them are pretty tricky. Actually, keep software updated is something that is very challenging, at least for us, because we need to figure out a way. I mean, usually IoT devices have a pretty long lifetime as opposed to some, I don't know, some other types of softwares, for instance. And how do we come up with a proper solution to deal with all the massive avalanche of CVs that will come in the coming years? And how do we empower our customers to do this? That's really an interesting point, and there are many challenges and technical and organizational there.
Perfect.
And some of the topics also as well. I mean, monitor system telemetry data is a very interesting one, and it's an expanding domain actually. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to.
No. This is what it's about. It's about both sides of the coin. So we're going to go into questions now. Everybody, if you have any questions, our experts are here. I have one to kick us off as we've been listening, and obviously I am not an expert like these guys, so I'm learning along with you guys. So yeah, if you have any questions, please write it in the little tab down here in the corner or on LinkedIn or wherever you are. Paul, can you hear me while I'm about to ask my question? Just making sure he can. Yes, he can. He's nodding. We're good. Okay, so obviously you guys have been talking about like pen testing and development, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm bringing a product to market in 2023. It's going to be a connected device. Obviously, you go development first, and then you test it. But if I'm going to pay for developers and testers, do I want to bring them in together? What is the best way to make sure that no one's going to hack my device? Do you what is the best relationship that you guys can have, really?
Collaborative. Number one, like you don't want to get into a situation where it's like a fiefdom, or I think the phrase we use typically is sometimes we have to call your baby ugly. but we still love it. We're there. We want to raise this baby together, right? So it's as you know, the answer is collaboration all the way. Because it gets the best results, and we can have we sometimes do these product reviews, as we call them, from like inception of thought all the way through the process. They're showing us diagrams of things before they're getting the devices actually produced, etc. So we can be involved as early as someone is willing to do it. With the odd day of consulting here or there. So in a nutshell, collaboration wins. It's the most effective way to spend the budget.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I strongly agree with this one. You mentioned the white box approach. I mean, this is precisely what allows a penetration test lab such as yourself to be the most efficient and to emulate the conditions where an attacker may have a very large amount of time, except that you do have only a few weeks, or I don't know, depending on the project. This is precisely where I think that us as developer, we need to provide you with but of course the source code, but the security documentation, everything that will help you spot the defects as soon as possible and spot how much ugly the baby is, so to say. And actually it goes the other way around. I mean, the penetration test reports are extremely useful in patching a product. Being able to understand precisely the attacks or you came up with, and possibly being able to reproduce them up to some level is extremely makes us more efficient in patching the proper way and not opening additional attack path in the process. So again, yeah, strongly agreed. Collaborative all the way.
So you heard it here first, guys. Together, together forever. I think we only have a few minutes left anyway, but one last thing, just for my interest, what from a pen testing point of view and from a development point of view is like the number one mistake that people make that could be hacked or is a security issue? What's the number one thing?
So I've got one. It's kind of high level, but the one I noticed the most is the preconception under which you can grab a non-secure product completely developed from the ground up and operational and add some security on it. And by adding some security is thinking that you can just build some kind of armor around it. Usually it does not work this way. I mean, security by design is kind of a buzzword, but it's an actual true one. I mean, the impacts of fixing a broken product from a security point of view may be tremendous and may enforce you to come up to the very beginning, first steps of your development.
Yeah, I wouldn't know if the phrase translates exactly, but sticking humps on a horse doesn't make it a camel. Right? So it's too late to want a camel if you've built a horse. So
got it. Okay, that makes sense.
And of course, default platforms. Let's get rid of this now.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we're going to end on that. And Paul, has talked about not being in prison, which is great. We've got talking about horses and camels, which is lovely. This is why we do lives, right? Guys, thank you so much for watching. Paul and Julian, thank you so much for being our experts and for being here and talking. I hope everyone has enjoyed it and that you've all learned a lot. Stick around. Well, we will have the on-demand will be live soon. So if you want to watch it back, you can, to get all the experts' top tips. And we'll also be sending, some post-event emails which talks about kind of what's happened, some videos, some highlights. If there's anything you need from us or from Pentest, please get in touch, and I'm sure we can put you through to the right people. So thank you. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for attending and asking questions. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.